And you have just watched the third installment in NPT's Next Door Neighbor series. Here to talk with us about the program is Marlen Santana Perez, a social worker with St. Thomas Health Services, David Morales, an interpreter, writer, and translator, Raul Lopez, chair of the Republican Hispanic National Assembly of Tennessee, and Renata Soto, executive director of Conexion Americas, and now all Nashville residents, and we're glad you're all here. Thanks very much for coming. Marlen, I want to start with you. One of the interesting issues in the program is this complexity of what Anglos may call the Latino community or the Hispanic community. Is there really such a thing?
In my opinion, the Hispanic concept is an American concept. If you ask me if there's a real Hispanic community, I would say yes and no. I mean, I think the Hispanic community is made up of many communities. If you see a Puerto Rican in New York, or a Mexican in Texas, or a Cuban that came here in the 60s, I mean, they see themselves more different than similar, even if they have the same or very similar, I would say, culture, or they share some of the culture, but they're very different. I think the community is divided by many things. Country of origin, level of acculturation, the education level, now the immigration status, the food preference. I mean, we are very different. And I think the concept, I didn't know anything about Hispanics until I came here. Before I came to the United States, that word never existed to me.
And you
so
came,
to me, it's a new concept.
And you came from Cuba.
From Cuba.
Many of the many persons in the Latino community from Nashville are from Central America or from Mexico.
From Mexico.
And do you see yourself as a member of a community that includes those persons, or as you've been here now, do you see yourself more as a member of a community that includes the whole large city, or both?
In the beginning, I saw myself more as a Cuban. So the country where I came from, it was the primary way to see myself. Now that I've been here for 10 years, I think of myself as a Cuban American, as a Cuban Nashvilleian. Even I know there's a Hispanic, concept to call everyone that comes from Latin American country. But I see myself more as a Cuban.
I would like to add that I think issues of identity, just like anybody, sometimes you find issues, things, values, perspectives that draw you to call that similarity that you have with people. And in some senses, you're very much in touch with your heritage, your language, your family values. And I think that that's the same for how we feel sometimes then that we're part of our larger community, that we are Nashvilleians, that our children are born here, and that we share some of the same aspirations with families who have come to Nashville from other states or are native Nashvilleians who remain here because of the quality of life and the opportunities that Nashville offers us. So I think that our identity is not either or, is really both. We are from this community, but we are also from somewhere else. And sometimes that brings us together, and sometimes that brings us together to other people that we would have not met if we would have not moved here.
Yeah, I see. I kind of springboard both. I see two major groups. I see those that have totally integrated in a non-Hispanic community in Nashville as a whole, and another community which is kind of, because of lack of language or whatever, have kind of, that's a different, and then there's an overlap. For instance, those that have already integrated but then go back because we understand each other, we know the language and that type of thing. So there is some kind of overlap, but I definitely see two different, for lack of a better term, types of Hispanics, some that have already integrated and some that haven't. And it's because of language barrier. And because if you can't communicate with non-Hispanics, there's not going to be that tie.
Does that fall along generational lines? Because we've seen that in some of the other programs that we've done in this series, that there is a distinct difference between first generation and second generation immigrants as people begin to find that this is home.
Yes, and if you say generation, not by age, but generation of immigrants,
That's
yes.
right.
Yes, it all depends on, if you're first generation, obviously you don't have the skill level yet to speak English, and many, because of lack of work or are working 2 or 3 jobs, so they haven't had the opportunity to learn the English language fully, to fully integrate.
There's also an issue in integration. When you come from a different country and have to learn a language, I've always seen it as a handicap. A person has to learn a different language as an adult is a handicapped person, just as a person who is in a wheelchair. So they always have a problem of integrating. But we always see that the generation that was brought up here, the kids that came here very young or that were born here, integrate completely and immediately.
And in fact, seem not just to integrate or even to assimilate, but to drive culture.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, the story of the United States is that the persons who are typically considered the outsiders are often the people who force the culture and drive the culture in some very interesting and new directions.
Well, yeah, that you can see in for example, the history of music, and we're seeing it in our food. The way the food is changing in the United States is being driven by the immigrants. The way music, jazz, for example, was brought from many places, including Latin America and Africa, and was developed here. And we see those changes going on continuously.
David, I want to talk about a different change that you touched on in the documentary, and that is change that's happened in this city over time. You described the 9/11 event as completely remaking the way that you experienced Nashville, or at least that, as you saw yourself through other people's eyes, experienced Nashville. Can you expound on that some?
Well, after 9/11, immediately you started noticing there was an enormous distrust. People in general didn't know what to believe or who to trust. That's the point where I felt people started looking at foreigners differently. It was very obvious with the Arabics. Immediately there was a change of attitude towards them, but it's about the time when you started noticing all these movements against immigrants in general. You started noticing all this drive to push undocumented people out, and things like trying to impose a language or trying to accuse foreigners of not assimilating. Basically, that's when you started hearing about it. It was after 9/11.
For me, the awakening was late in 2005. Renata, I was sitting with a group of people discussing issues, Nashvillians, and the issues were fairly mild, and then someone threw the match of immigration into the tinderbox, and the group of people exploded. They wanted to talk about that more than anything else. What was happening to bring that conversation to such a boil at that time?
Well, I think that the demographic change that we have experienced in Tennessee, and in particular in Middle Tennessee, it is obvious to all of us, right? You drive by a construction site, you drive on Nolensville Road and other areas, and you can see workers. The food that we have now access to, I think it's obvious to all Nashvillians that people from all over the world have come here. And I think that with that, we have to recognize that for Nashvillians, it's the first time in 100 years that we experience immigration. When I came here in 1997, I was the first person with an accent that many of my coworkers in a professional setting had ever met. And I know that for many Nashvillians, that once that change became so apparent, and then it felt like the numbers were really growing, I think that there's a lot of questions that the Native community asks of itself. Who are we, and why are these newcomers attracted to come here, and what does it mean to our community and to our identity as Nashvillians? And so I think that the demographic change was obvious by then in many ways, and I think that politically also we were feeling at the federal level that issues that we wanted our federal government to deal with, local communities were frustrated because they were not. And so I think that the issue of immigration was one that nationally many journalists and so-called journalists were bringing attention and were bringing us a scapegoat for talking about the reasons why many things were going wrong in this country. And I think the localities and local communities like Nashville, some of us were feeding some of that, and it really fed fears of fears of the new. And I think that the English-only conversation and the debate and the test that Nashville passed in January was a good climax for some of that. That really reflected the need to have the dialogue, and that really brought up some of those fears and some of the need for understanding each other. And why is it are people coming here? What are the conditions that they leave behind that make them come to Nashville?
But I do want to put a point here. I think anytime there's not communication, it creates mistrust. I don't care what, if even a husband and a wife, if there's not communication, it creates mistrust. And because of the language barrier, there's a lack of communication. And when the numbers get so large that two groups cannot communicate, there's going to be mistrust made. I mean, look at it in the football teams, okay? You talk, let's say, University of Tennessee and Florida. There's a mistrust there because they don't communicate. Now, if for some reason it becomes an SEC issue, then all of a sudden there could be communication because there's a bonding thing. So that's why the second generation is going to get better. It's just this first generation, and then because of the lack of communication. And then when you throw in there, when there's been, like you said, a fire thrown in there that some of these people are coming in here undocumented, that throws another issue on there than as opposed to just that person can't communicate with me. Well, not only can he not communicate with me, does he belong here? So it's one brick at a time that's causing this mistrust.
But I would argue that we removed the language issue, and that fear and that miscommunication still exist. The Irish immigrants in this country faced and were described and discriminated against, just like new waves of people coming from Latin America, and they spoke English. And so I think that often we hide the issue under the issues of language or documentation. But I would argue that at the very root, deep cause of the challenge is exactly that we are fearful of the new, and that that really call for conscientious and deliberate dialogue among people, the newcomers and the people that are here, regardless of language.
Yes.
I think is the fear
And
of the new.
that's what I agree, that the growth of the foreigners in Nashville is very important. Remember that Nashville is like relative new, a new destination for immigrants. So when you think about Nashville, I remember when I was still in Cuba, my husband was living here, and he was writing letters saying that I live in Nashville, Tennessee. Wouldn't even know Tennessee as a state, part of the United States. So also, not much of the racial and the cultural integration Nashville has seen since the civil rights movement 50 years ago. So this is like a new beginning of a new movement, if you want to call it.
I wonder if, as the community has grown, if there are both advantages and disadvantages that come with that growth when, as we saw, you can support, a community can support a church, and not just a church, but a number of social organizations that bring thousands of people together. It allows those persons to be able to share something of a common heritage, way of thinking, depending on the organization. Does that help those folks, in your judgment, feel more a part of the community, or does it encourage a separateness?
No, I think it's the opposite. I think it helped the community. And that's why we have many people coming from Texas, from other states here, because they feel this, the state is more, even if, we're not sure if it is for, in reality, they feel more welcome coming here because the population has grown, and there's more opportunities and more churches, more places where they can go, and more clubs, more opportunities for jobs, more opening to speak different language. When I started my first job here, remember that we were not allowed to speak English in the job. So things have changed, and those changes bring people together.
But I would again, I would respectfully disagree with Renata, because I think, again, with communication, a lot of barriers are taken away. I spend majority of my time, I would say 75, 80% of my time with non-Hispanics, and I'm accepted with no problem whatsoever. And I spend a lot, the other 25% with Hispanics, again with no problem. Why? Because I can speak both languages and I can express myself. My daughters, I've got 6 kids, but 2 I adopted from Colombia when they were teenage girls. And when they first came here, they didn't know a word of English. And it was that separateness when they first came in. But as we taught them English, now they know English perfectly. It's only been 3 or 4 years. And they've got hundreds of friends, they accept them, there's no problem. Why? Because they communicate and there's that openness with each other, and people get to know you as an individual, not as a group. And that's what's happening when there's no communication. Is this group over here, even though it's a great church or whatever, but they're not necessarily communicating with this group, or vice versa. The ones that just speak English aren't communicating with here because they don't know each other's language. So how can you communicate if you don't know each other's language?
Who bears the burden for bringing those people together? How does the burden fall, fairly or unfairly, on bridging that gap?
I think we've got great representation here. Conexion America does a great job of that. You do in your social work. It's just going to take time.
I think it's a two-way street. I mean, I think that true integration must be understood as a multidimensional process that really requires seeing people as workers, as family members, as parents of kids that have kids to go to school, as neighbors that are involved in neighborhood associations. And it is also a two-way street that demands reciprocity and mutual respect, adaptation, and learning from the host community and from us newcomers who are coming to a new community. And I would like to say that I don't think that I want to clarify, I didn't mean to say that learning English is not important. I think that there's a distinction between saying that there's an important, undeniable need for immigrants to learn English. And when we, with the families that we serve, when we ask people, what is the one thing that you could do to propel your prosperity that you came here to seek for in the first place, what would that be? And people don't mention papers, and people don't mention a better paying job. People say learning English. People understand that learning English is that one tool that would really make them more able to participate in community life in general.
But is it just a piece?
Yes,
if I
it is
ask
just
my
one piece.
patients,
Exactly.
what would be different for you if you're in front of a Nashvilleian, I mean, someone that was born here, what would you would like to have different? They say, the way I look. And I myself have been stopped by a police officer because the way I look. So it's not just the language. There's so many things that make us different.
I got to agree. I have a friend who comes from Eagle Pass, Texas, and he looks Hispanic. He's a dark skin. He told me when he came here, his problem was he's a young guy, he's a musician, and in Texas, the cops would pull him over because he was a young kid. Here, he gets pulled over because of the way he looks. He says it's different. It's a different way they treat you and a different reason they pull you over. And it's still a factor.
Well, this begs the question that's discussed in the documentary. David, I want to start with you about this, about the 287G program. Has that, in your judgment, been an impediment to the communities coming together, to people coming together here in Nashville? Has it helped by identifying and lifting up issues of the law and of immigration status? Is it, in your judgment, a plus or a minus?
I think 287G is a minus. It gives, it puts something that is a federal issue and that is actually a civil issue also, and it puts it in the hands of people that are in charge of the criminal part, the criminal aspect. So you have policemen looking at people's legal status as a criminal issue, not as a civil issue. And to me, that's fundamentally the biggest problem with 287G. Immigration officers are completely different from police, sheriff department. They do a different kind of work. They're prepared to work differently with people. And when you have people that, you have the police and the sheriff looking at an immigration status as if it were a police aspect, as if it were a criminal issue, like thieves and like assault, that kind of thing. It just does the wrong, sends the wrong message to the community to begin with, and it's the wrong way to enforce the law. But it creates mainly a distrust in the community. We have a problem now, as was seen in the documentary, of the community not trusting the police when they are victims of crime, and that, although there were efforts before 287G was put in force to bring the police and the community together, there have been many steps taken back because of 287G.
Raul, you spoke in the documentary briefly in favor of the program. Do you think it has made a positive difference on balance in Nashville, or do you think it's too early to tell?
Well, probably the fourth odd wheel again in this conversation. Yeah, I think it's been very positive. We've had over 5,000 arrests, and we've had over 20,000 crimes that were associated to that, and 70 gang members that are no longer here in Nashville. So I believe any time you can make the streets safer in Nashville, it's a good thing. I, believe it or not, work also for a prison ministry. So I'm there on the front lines. I see it every day, and we're not alone. I work with a lot of men who are on probation and parole, and if they don't have a driver's license and they pull them over, well, guess what? They get rearrested, and they go back to the original crime that they had, whatever they may be. It might be a 15-year sentence over not having a driver's license. And it's the same thing here. If you're coming here illegally, then you know there's a risk involved. I mean, it's natural. There's a risk involved. It's like when I was a kid and I used to buy tickets, I keep going to sports analogy, buy tickets in the top, sneak down to the bottom. Well, I'd always have my head over because that's not the ticket I bought. And, I had a good time and all that, but, if I got up and did something weird, guess what? They'd either kick me back up there or kick me out over something that's not related to that. So I think it's a good program. It's keeping our streets safer. And for me, I've been stopped. Unfortunately, I got a heavy foot, and I've been stopped many times. I've never had a problem. My daughters are very Colombian, very thick accents. They drive. They've had tickets. They've had wrecks. No issues. Yes, there will be some bad apples out there, but generally you have to be arrested because you don't have a license. And generally you don't have a license because you've broken another law, whether it be civil or not. You have broken another law. And one thing we always tell our men, anytime you do something unlawful, there's consequences, and that's just part of it.
There have been instances where we know the program has resulted in some families being split up.
Yes.
Marlen, I wonder if you could speak to that. Do you see those families in your practice? What happens to those families?
I see it all the time. And you have families where they had to prepare a legal document in case they got arrested. The children that are in school, someone can come and pick up these children and take it home. I mean, that's horrible. And I disagree in part with what Raul said about being an illegal act to come here. I mean, I consider myself a wetback. I came the same way as many others undocumented. I crossed the river to Mexico.
Right.
The only difference between me and people who doesn't have documents is that there's this Cuban Adjustment Act, a law that protects myself, that allow me to fix.
Once you got to the country,
yes,
and me too.
But this is no different.
But that's the law of the land.
I mean,
that is the law. And that's the thing. That's why we need, I think everyone here agrees, we need federal immigration reform. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I don't care which side of the aisle or whatever. There has to be some kind of guest workers program, whatever you might want to call it. But we have to have federal immigration reform. We've got to make it easier for those who can work here. I mean, this breaks my heart, too, about breaking up families. I deal with that all the time, too. I get calls, all kinds of things. And it's heartbreaking. But it's because the federal government doesn't have the guts to deal with this issue, and they need to.
I wonder what you think as we shift a bit to talk about this idea of a broader immigration reform and what a new national policy might look like, about the prospects for success based on what you've experienced here in Nashville? Because it seems as though this is an issue that lends itself to fairly rapid polarization. We saw it during the English-only debate that we've referenced here some. And what you're talking about, Raul, what others seem to be talking about, is something that comes together somewhere in the middle, or at least something that recognizes, every time someone says immigration reform, we're talking about recognizing some sort of rights of people who are here. David, do you think that Nashvillians who are of Anglo or African American descent, are they ready to embrace a path toward immigration reform?
Well, I would hope so. That's it has to happen sooner or later. We have to change a system that is completely dysfunctional. Immigration system, immigration law in the United States is a disaster. There's no other way of putting it. Now, how much they'll be able to, I mean, any immigration reform is going to have to involve some legalization. So how much people are going to accept, that's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that.
I think that at the end of the day, I think, again, if we reflect on the history of our country and how the native communities, or those that have been there for a while, felt about new people coming in, I think that, history is repeating itself. And I have complete faith in the tradition of the American people to be in touch with its immigrant roots that are both our history and our destiny. And I think that at the end of the day, our elected officials and our local communities and citizens, like all the Nashvillians that were asked questions January 22nd about English only, I think that we will understand that it's in the best interest economically and socially for our country to recognize the challenges that are created when we have people that come from other places that don't speak the language, but also the contributions of that presence economically, culturally, and socially.
It seems likely that when this city, with its 35 council districts, is redrawn and redistricted following the next census, that there will be a district that is created that has the potential to be majority Latino. And we may face for the first time the very interesting prospect of a Metro Council that looks very different from what we've had in the previous 47 years of metropolitan government in Nashville. And I wonder, I'll start with you, Raul, about that. Do you think that is a necessary thing in order for the Latino community, as it grows in Nashville, to achieve political influence and power?
Yes, of course. I think I believe in this country. It's the greatest country in the world, and that's why I left Cuba, because this is a country of freedom. So yes, political power is very important, and we need political influence on both the Democrat side and the Republican side to voice our opinions. That being said, my wish is not only we'd have one council district that's powerful. My wish is that we are embedded throughout the whole community, so we influence all 35 districts instead of just one or two. I think the quicker we become part of, not just Nolensville Road, I want us to be everywhere, and it's happening, and it'll continue as we progress, and that's my wish.
20 seconds.
Well, I just wanted to add to that, the generational aspect of this. We have all these young people going to school that are intermingling all kinds of people from all kinds of parts of the world, and that's going to cause a big change. It's a generational change. The younger people in Nashville are much more accepting of different people from other places.
Thank you, David. Thank you all. Thank you. We've run out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists for their participation and encourage you to join the conversation. You can email us at tv8@wnpt.net. Call our viewer comment line at 259-9326 and discuss this program and all other Next Door Neighbor documentaries on our online forum. For more information about this program and MPT's Next Door Neighbor series, log on to our website, wmpt.net/nextdoorneighbors. I'm Tom Lee. Thanks for watching.
Next Door Neighbors is made possible by the support of the Nissan Foundation, the HCA Foundation on behalf of HCA and the TriStar family of hospitals, by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by members of Nashville Public Television.